The last thing Phillip Thornton expected when he rode into Tucumcari, New Mexico territory on that scorching August afternoon in 1878 was to have his entire world turned upside down by a woman chasing a kitten through the dusty streets. Phillip had always been the careful type, the man who checked his surroundings twice before making camp, who never drew his pistol unless absolutely necessary, and who preferred the company of horses to people most days. At 26 years old, he had spent the better part of a decade working cattle drives from Texas to Kansas, saving his money and keeping his head down. He had seen enough of the wild frontier to know that caution kept a man breathing, and breathing was something he preferred to keep doing. The town of Tucumcari was smaller than he had imagined, just a collection of wooden buildings clustered along the railroad that had recently pushed through. The sun beat down mercilessly on the wide dirt street, and Phillip could feel the sweat gathering under his hat brim as he guided his horse toward what looked like a stable. He had $300 in his saddlebag, carefully saved, and plans to buy a small piece of land somewhere quiet where he could raise a few head of cattle and live out his days in peace. That was when he heard the commotion. A high-pitched voice called out, feminine and frustrated, followed by what could only be described as the most peculiar meowing sound Phillip had ever heard. He turned in his saddle just in time to see a small orange blur streak across the street, followed closely by a young woman in a blue calico dress who was running at full speed, her dark blonde hair coming loose from its pins. The kitten, no bigger than a man's hand, darted directly under Phillip's horse. His mount, a steady gelding named Ranger who rarely spooked at anything, pranced sideways in surprise. Phillip tightened his grip on the reins, keeping his seat with practiced ease, but the woman was not so fortunate. She crashed directly into Ranger's shoulder, bounced backward, and landed squarely on her backside in the dust. Phillip dismounted in one fluid motion, his hands already reaching to help before his mind caught up with the action. This was exactly the kind of thing he usually avoided, getting involved in other people's business, but something about the sight of the woman sitting there, covered in dust, with the most mortified expression on her face, bypassed all his careful instincts. "Are you hurt, madam?" he asked, extending his hand. She looked up at him, and Phillip found himself staring into the greenest eyes he had ever seen. They were the color of spring grass after rain, bright and alive, and currently shimmering with what he suspected were tears of embarrassment rather than pain. "I am perfectly fine," she said, her voice stiff with wounded dignity. "Just my pride that is bruised, I assure you." She took his hand, and Phillip felt a jolt run through him at the contact. Her hand was small and warm in his, calloused in a way that spoke of hard work despite the femininity of her appearance. He pulled her to her feet, perhaps a bit more gently than strictly necessary, and found himself reluctant to let go. "Your kitten," he said, nodding toward where the orange ball of fluff had finally stopped running and was now sitting in the shade of the general store's awning, calmly washing its face as if it had not just caused complete chaos. The woman let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a groan. "That kitten has been nothing but trouble since the moment I found her 3 days ago. I should have left her where she was, but she was so tiny and hungry, and I have never been good at walking away from things that need help." Phillip found himself smiling, a rare expression for him. "She does not look particularly sorry for the trouble." "She never does," the woman said, brushing ineffectively at the dust covering her dress. "I am Amelia Dorsett, by the way. I arrived in Tucumcari just last week from Santa Fe. I am the new school teacher, or at least I am supposed to be once they finish building the schoolhouse." "Phillip Thornton," he replied, touching the brim of his hat. "Just passing through mostly." Amelia studied him for a moment, her head tilted slightly to one side. "You do not look like the kind of man who is just passing through. You have the look of someone who is searching for something." Her perceptiveness unsettled him, and Philip felt his automatic defenses rising. He had spent years perfecting the art of being forgettable, of not drawing attention or forming attachments. "I should help you catch your kitten," he said, deliberately changing the subject. The kitten, as if sensing their intention, chose that moment to dart away again, this time heading straight for the open door of the saloon. Amelia let out another frustrated sound and gathered her skirts, preparing to give chase, but Philip held up a hand. "Let me," he said. A saloon is no place for a schoolteacher, especially a new one trying to make a good impression. He did not wait for her response, just strode toward the saloon with the same measured caution he applied to everything in life. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, and it took his eyes a moment to adjust. The place was nearly empty this early in the afternoon, just the barkeeper wiping down glasses and two older men playing cards in the corner. The kitten was perched on top of the bar, her tiny orange tail swishing back and forth as she eyed a bowl of peanuts with clear intent. "That your cat?" the barkeeper asked, an amused smile on his weathered face. "Belongs to the lady outside," Philip said, approaching slowly. He had gentled wild horses and calmed spooked cattle, but he had never tried to catch a kitten before. "Mind if I?" The barkeeper gestured his permission, and Philip reached out slowly, talking in the low, soothing voice he used with animals. "Easy now, little one. Your mama is worried about you out there. Let us just get you back to her safe and sound." To his surprise, the kitten did not run. Instead, she turned those enormous golden eyes on him and let out the tiniest mew he had ever heard. Then she walked directly into his outstretched hands, purring so loudly that he could feel the vibration through his palms. "Well, I will be," the barkeeper said with a chuckle. "That is the friendliest little thing I ever saw. Been watching her run that poor woman ragged all morning." Philip tucked the kitten against his chest, where she immediately curled up and closed her eyes, apparently exhausted from her adventure. He could feel the rapid beating of her tiny heart against his hand, and something in his own chest tightened unexpectedly. When he emerged from the saloon, Amelia was waiting where he had left her, though she had made some attempt to straighten her appearance. Her face lit up when she saw the kitten nestled contentedly in his arms. "How did you do that?" she asked, hurrying over. "She has been completely wild for days." "Animals can sense intent," Philip said, carefully transferring the kitten to her arms. "If you are nervous, they get nervous. If you are calm, they settle." The kitten, apparently content now that she was back with Amelia, stretched and yawned, showing tiny needle-sharp teeth, then settled into her new position with evident satisfaction. "I wish I had your confidence with her," Amelia said, stroking the kitten's soft fur. "I am afraid I have been nothing but anxious since arriving here. Everything is so different from what I am used to. Santa Fe at least had some civilization to it, but Tucumcari is so raw and new. I keep wondering if I made a terrible mistake accepting the teaching position." Philip found himself wanting to reassure her, to tell her that everything would work out fine, but caution held his tongue. He did not know this woman, did not know what her life was like or what she needed to hear. Getting involved in her concerns would be a mistake, the kind of entanglement he had spent years avoiding. "I should be going," he said, taking a step back toward where Ranger waited patiently. "Good luck with the kitten." But Amelia reached out, not quite touching his arm but the gesture stopping him nonetheless. "Wait," she said. "Please. I did not properly thank you for your help, and you were kind enough to spare me the embarrassment of chasing her through the saloon. The least I can do is offer you a meal." I am staying at the boarding house just down the street, and Mrs. Chen, the proprietress, is an excellent cook. She always makes too much anyway." Every instinct Philip had told him to politely decline, to mount up and ride away from this woman with her green eyes and her troublesome kitten before he could get any more involved. But he heard himself saying, "That is kind of you to offer. I suppose I do need to eat before moving on." The smile Amelia gave him was like the sun breaking through storm clouds, and Philip felt something shift inside him, some long-held wall developing its first crack. The boarding house was a neat two-story building with a wide front porch, the wood still new enough that Philip could smell the pine sap in the heat. A sign hanging from the porch rail read, "Chen's Boarding House," in careful English letters with Chinese characters painted below. Mrs. Chen herself greeted them at the door, a small woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue. "Miss Dorsett," she said, her accent thick but her English clear. "You catch that demon cat finally?" "With Mr. Thornton's help," Amelia said, her cheeks flushing slightly. "I was hoping we might have lunch if there is enough." Mrs. Chen looked Philip up and down with an assessing gaze that made him feel like she was seeing straight through to his bones. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded once, sharply. "Enough food always. You come, sit. Wash hands first." The boarding house dining room was simple but clean, with 4 long tables and benches. Only one other table was occupied, by what looked like a traveling merchant and his wife. Philip washed his hands in the basin by the door and took a seat across from Amelia, feeling more awkward than he had in years. The kitten, apparently worn out from her adventures, had fallen asleep in Amelia's lap, a small purring bundle of orange fluff. "What do you call her?" Philip asked, nodding toward the kitten. "I have been calling her Mischief," Amelia said with a rueful smile. "It seemed appropriate given her behavior, though perhaps I am giving her ideas by naming her that." "Animals grow into their names sometimes," Philip agreed. "I once knew a horse called Trouble who absolutely lived up to it." "And your horse? Ranger, you called him?" Philip was surprised she had noticed. "Yes, he belonged to a Texas Ranger once, or so the man who sold him to me claimed. I have had him for 5 years now, best horse I ever owned." Mrs. Chen appeared with 2 bowls of soup, rich with vegetables and chicken, and a plate of fresh bread that steamed when broken open. Philip realized he had not eaten since dawn, and the smell made his stomach clench with hunger. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, and Philip found himself relaxing despite his usual wariness. There was something comfortable about Amelia's presence, something that did not demand conversation or performance. She ate with good appetite, not picking at her food the way he had seen some women do, and she fed small pieces of chicken to Mischief, who woke up just long enough to eat before falling asleep again. "You said you were just passing through," Amelia said after a while. "Where are you heading?" Philip took a drink of water, considering his answer. "Not sure exactly. I have been working cattle drives for years, but I am getting tired of it. The constant moving, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. I have saved some money, and I am thinking about buying land somewhere, starting my own small operation." "That sounds like a good plan," Amelia said. "Do you have family waiting for you somewhere?" "No family," Philip said, the words coming easier than they usually did. "My parents died when I was young. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I was 17, old enough to make my own way but young enough that I had no idea what I was doing. I signed on with a cattle outfit headed north and just kept moving after that." Amelia's expression softened with sympathy. "I am sorry. That must have been terribly difficult." "It was a long time ago," Philip said, uncomfortable with her compassion. "What about you? What brings a schoolteacher all the way out to Tucumcari?" The light dimmed a little in Amelia's eyes, and Philip immediately regretted the question, but she answered readily enough. I needed a fresh start. I was engaged to be married in Santa Fe, but it did not work out. He decided that he preferred my cousin to me, actually. They married last month, and I decided I could not stay in the same town and watch them live the life I thought would be mine. His loss, Philip said before he could think better of it. Amelia looked at him in surprise, then smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. That is kind of you to say. I am trying to see it as an opportunity rather than a failure. Teaching has always been my passion, and Tucumcari needs a teacher desperately. The children here have had no formal schooling, and I think I can make a real difference. I am sure you will, Philip said, and meant it. They talked through the rest of the meal, conversation flowing more easily than Philip had expected. Amelia told him about her plans for the school, her ideas about teaching reading and arithmetic and history to children who had never sat in a classroom. Philip found himself telling her about the cattle drives, about the beauty of watching thousands of longhorns move across the open prairie, about the danger of river crossings and stampedes, and the bone-deep exhaustion that came with months in the saddle. The afternoon sun was slanting through the windows by the time they finished eating, and Philip realized with a start that hours had passed. He never spent hours talking to anyone, let alone a woman he had just met. I should go, he said, standing abruptly. I need to see about getting Ranger settled for the night. Amelia stood as well, cradling the still sleeping kitten. Of course. Thank you again for your help and for the company. It has been nice to talk to someone. I have been feeling quite alone here. Something in the way she said it, the loneliness that colored her words, made Philip's chest ache. He recognized that feeling, had lived with it himself for so many years that he barely noticed it anymore. But hearing it in her voice, seeing it in the way she held herself, made him want to do something about it. I will be in town for a few days at least, he heard himself say. If you need any help with anything, the kitten or otherwise, I am staying at the hotel across from the general store. The smile she gave him was grateful and warm. I would like that. Mischief seems to respond to you much better than she does to me. Perhaps you could teach me your secret. Philip touched his hat brim in farewell and left before he could make any more promises he was not sure he could keep. As he walked back toward where he had left Ranger, he tried to understand what had just happened. He had come to Tucumcari planning to stay one night at most, just long enough to rest his horse and resupply before moving on. But now he had committed to staying several days, all because of a woman with green eyes and a troublesome kitten. The cautious part of him, the part that had kept him safe and unattached for so many years, was raising alarm bells. Getting involved with Amelia Dorsett would be a mistake. She was putting down roots in Tucumcari, building a life here, while he was still planning to move on eventually. Nothing good could come from letting himself care about her. But as he settled Ranger in the stable and paid for a week's board, Philip could not quite bring himself to regret the decision to stay. The next morning dawned clear and hot, promising another scorching day. Philip was up with the sun out of habit, years of trail life having trained his body to wake before dawn. He checked on Ranger, satisfied himself that the stable was clean and the horse well cared for, then wandered back toward the main street, not quite ready to admit to himself that he was hoping to see Amelia. He found her sitting on the front porch of the boarding house, mischief on a length of ribbon tied around her tiny neck, the other end wrapped around Amelia's wrist. The kitten was stalking a grasshopper through the porch boards with intense concentration, while Amelia read from a thick book. "Good morning," Philip called out, climbing the porch steps. Amelia looked up, her face brightening when she saw him. "Mr. Thornton, I was hoping I might see you today. I wanted to show you what I accomplished this morning." She held up her wrist with the ribbon. "I fashioned a sort of leash for Mischief. I know it seems silly, but I thought if I could at least keep her from running off, we might avoid yesterday's drama." Phillip crouched down to examine the setup. Mischief, apparently bored with the grasshopper, immediately abandoned her hunt to climb up his arm, her tiny claws catching in his shirt sleeve. He gently detached her and held her up to eye level. "You are going to be a handful when you grow up," he told the kitten seriously. "You know that." Mischief responded by trying to bite his nose, though her teeth were too small to do any damage. Phillip could not help but laugh, and he heard Amelia join in, her laughter bright and genuine. "She likes you," Amelia observed. "She barely tolerates me, but she took to you immediately." "Animals are strange," Phillip said, settling the kitten back on the porch where she immediately returned to hunting the grasshopper. "They make their own decisions about people. Mrs. Chen says that animals are better judges of character than most humans," Amelia said. "She told me that if Mischief trusts you, then you must be a good man." Phillip felt heat rise in his cheeks that had nothing to do with the morning sun. "Mrs. Chen does not know me well enough to make that judgment." "Perhaps not," Amelia agreed, "but I am inclined to trust her instincts anyway." She stood, brushing dust from her skirt, and Phillip noticed she was wearing a different dress today, a simple brown cotton that was more practical than the blue calico from yesterday. "I was about to walk over to the site where they are building the schoolhouse. Would you like to come with me? I find I prefer company when I walk, and Mischief is not much for conversation." They walked through the early morning streets of Tucumcari, Mischief trotting along on her ribbon leash, occasionally stopping to investigate interesting smells or pounce on shadows. The town was beginning to wake up, shopkeepers opening their doors, the smell of baking bread drifting from somewhere nearby. The schoolhouse site was at the edge of town, a cleared plot of land with the frame of the building already raised. Several men were at work despite the early hour, the sound of hammers and saws filling the air. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with graying hair, looked up as they approached. "Miss Dorsett," he called out, setting down his hammer and wiping his hands on his pants. "Come to check on our progress." "Good morning, Mr. Henderson," Amelia replied. "I hope I am not disturbing your work. I just wanted to see how things were coming along." "No disturbance at all," Henderson said warmly. He glanced at Phillip with open curiosity. "I do not believe we have met." "I am James Henderson, one of the town council members." "Phillip Thornton," Phillip said, shaking the offered hand. "Just visiting Tucumcari for a few days." "Any friend of Miss Dorsett is welcome here," Henderson said. "We are mighty glad to have her. Been needing a proper school teacher for a while now. Our children are growing up wild without education." They spent the next half hour touring the construction site, Henderson enthusiastically explaining his plans for the building. It would have 2 rooms, one for the younger children and one for the older students, with a small living quarter attached where Amelia could stay once the boarding house became too expensive. Phillip found himself impressed by the care being taken with the construction. The lumber was good quality, properly seasoned, and the men working knew their craft. This was not a thrown-together structure but a building meant to last. "We hope to have it finished within the month," Henderson said. "Think you can wait that long, Miss Dorsett?" "I can wait," Amelia assured him. "In the meantime, I have been preparing lessons and getting to know the families in town. Mrs. Chen has been very helpful in introducing me around." As they walked back toward the boarding house, Mischief decided she had walked quite enough and simply sat down in the middle of the street, refusing to move. Phillip scooped her up without thinking, and the kitten immediately curled into the crook of his arm and began to purr. "See," Amelia said with a laugh. She absolutely adores you. I am beginning to think I should just give her to you. I am not staying in Tucumcari permanently, Phillip reminded her, though the words felt hollow even as he said them. A traveling man has no business with a kitten. Are you sure about that? Amelia asked softly. About not staying, I mean. You do not seem like a man who is eager to keep moving. Phillip did not answer right away. They had reached the boarding house, and he set Mischief down on the porch where she immediately stretched out in a patch of sunlight. He should tell Amelia that she was wrong, that he had no intention of settling in Tucumcari, that he would be moving on as soon as he found the right piece of land elsewhere. But the lie would not come. Instead, he said, I do not know what I am sure about anymore. Amelia studied his face for a long moment, and Phillip had the unsettling feeling that she could see right through all his carefully constructed walls. That is honest at least, she said finally. I think sometimes not knowing is braver than pretending to have all the answers. Over the next week, Phillip found himself spending more and more time with Amelia. It started innocently enough, helping her with small tasks around the boarding house, teaching her how to better handle Mischief, accompanying her on walks through town. But gradually, it became something more, something that both thrilled and terrified him. He learned that she loved books more than almost anything, that she had taught herself to read at age 5 and had never stopped. He learned that she sang when she thought no one was listening, her voice sweet and clear. He learned that she was fiercely protective of the vulnerable, whether they were stray kittens or children who needed education, or anyone else who crossed her path needing help. And Amelia learned about him too. Phillip found himself opening up in ways he never had before, telling her about his childhood, about the loneliness of the trail, about his dreams of having land of his own and a life that meant something more than just surviving day to day. Mischief grew rapidly, as kittens do, losing some of her tiny fragility and developing into a lanky young cat with enormous ears and paws that suggested she would be larger than average when fully grown. She remained devoted to Phillip, following him whenever he was near and crying pitifully when he left. She thinks you are her father, Amelia said one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch watching the sun set. Mischief was draped across Phillip's lap, purring so loudly that people across the street could probably hear her. Cats do not think that way, Phillip said, but he stroked the kitten's soft fur gently. Do they not? Amelia asked. I think animals feel things just as deeply as we do. They love and trust and grieve. Just because they cannot speak our language does not mean they do not have feelings. You might be right about that, Phillip admitted. He had seen horses mourn lost companions, had watched cattle protect their calves with fierce devotion. I suppose I never thought about it quite that way before. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from gold to orange to deep purple. Phillip was acutely aware of Amelia sitting beside him, the way her shoulder was just inches from his, the way her hair caught the last light of day and seemed to glow. Phillip, she said softly, using his first name for the first time without the formal Mr. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you still here? You have been in Tucumcari for over a week now and you said you were only passing through. What made you stay? It was the question Phillip had been avoiding asking himself, though he knew the answer deep down. He could give her a safe response, could tell her that he liked the town, or that Ranger needed more rest, or any of a dozen other reasonable explanations. But Amelia deserved honesty, and something in him wanted to give it to her. You, he said simply. You made me want to stay. He heard her sharp intake of breath, felt her go very still beside him. For a moment, Phillip regretted the admission, worried that he had overstepped or made her uncomfortable. But then he felt her hand cover his where it rested on the porch railing, her fingers cool and gentle. "I am glad," she whispered. "I have been hoping you would say something like that. These past days with you have been the happiest I have had in a very long time." Phillip turned to look at her, and the expression on her face took his breath away. There was hope there, and warmth, and something that might have been the beginning of love. He saw his own feelings reflected back at him, and for once his caution failed him completely. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but Amelia met him halfway. Their lips touched softly, tentatively, and Phillip felt the entire world narrow down to just that point of contact. She tasted like the honey cake they had eaten with dinner, sweet and warm, and the small sound she made when he deepened the kiss slightly sent heat racing through his blood. They broke apart after a moment, both slightly breathless. Mischief, disturbed by the movement, stretched and relocated to Amelia's lap instead, apparently deciding that if the humans were going to be foolish, she would at least be comfortable. "I should probably apologize for that," Phillip said, though he did not feel particularly sorry. "Please do not," Amelia replied, her cheeks flushed pink. "I would have been disappointed if you had not done it eventually." Phillip laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. "Eventually. I have only known you a week." "A week can be a very long time when you are waiting for something," Amelia said, then bit her lip as if worried she had been too forward. "It can be," Phillip agreed softly. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, letting his fingers linger against her cheek. "Amelia, I need to be honest with you. I am not good at this, at connecting with people. I have spent so long keeping to myself, not letting anyone get close. I do not have much to offer you beyond what I am, which is just a cowboy with some saved money and no real plans beyond finding a piece of land somewhere." "That sounds like quite a lot to me," Amelia said. She covered his hand with hers, holding it against her cheek. "I do not need grand gestures or promises of riches. I just need honesty and kindness and someone who will stay when things get difficult. Can you offer me those things?" Phillip thought about it seriously, not wanting to promise something he could not deliver. But as he looked at Amelia, at the hope and trust in her eyes, he found that he wanted to be the man she believed him to be. "I can," he said finally. "I want to." "Then that is enough for now," Amelia said. "We can figure out the rest as we go along." They sat together as full darkness fell, making quiet plans and sharing dreams. Phillip told her about the kind of land he wanted to find, somewhere with good water and grass for cattle, maybe a few acres for crops. Amelia told him about her hopes for the school, about the children she had already met and her plans for their education. It was not until later, lying in his bed at the hotel, that Phillip allowed himself to feel the full weight of what was happening. He was falling in love with Amelia Dorsett, had probably been falling since the moment he caught her in his arms in the dusty street. And more terrifying than that, she seemed to be falling for him too. For a man who had spent years avoiding exactly this kind of entanglement, it should have sent him running. But instead, Phillip found himself looking forward to the next morning, to seeing Amelia again, to continuing whatever was building between them. Maybe, just maybe, caution was not always the best approach. Maybe sometimes the bravest thing a man could do was take a risk on something wonderful. The following weeks fell into a pattern that felt dangerously like domesticity. Phillip found work helping with the schoolhouse construction, his experience with building corrals and lined shacks translating well to the more formal carpentry. He still planned to look for land to buy, but somehow there was never quite the right time to leave Tucumcari, never quite the right moment to say goodbye to Amelia. They courted properly, or as properly as could be managed in a frontier town. Phillip took her to the traveling show that came through, where they watched a magician perform tricks that amazed and delighted the crowd. They attended a dance held in the half-finished schoolhouse, and Philip surprised himself by remembering the basic steps he had learned years ago. Amelia felt perfect in his arms, light and graceful, and the way she smiled up at him made his heart do complicated things in his chest. Mischief continued to grow, developing into a beautiful cat with bright orange fur and white paws. She had attached herself firmly to Philip, sleeping on his bed at the hotel despite the proprietor's initial objections, following him to the work site each morning, and spending her days hunting mice in the tall grass nearby. "That is your cat," Amelia said one afternoon, watching Mischief present Philip with a dead mouse, clearly expecting praise for her hunting prowess. "She has made her choice quite clear." "I suppose she has," Philip said, gently taking the mouse and disposing of it while Mischief purred proudly. "Strange to think I came to Tucumcari alone, and now I have acquired both a cat and a sweetheart." It was the first time either of them had used such a term, and Amelia's face lit up at the word. "Is that what I am, your sweetheart?" "If you will have me," Philip said, suddenly nervous despite everything that had passed between them. "I know I am not much, but I care for you, Amelia, more than I have cared for anyone in a very long time." Amelia crossed the distance between them and took both his hands in hers. "You are not much, Phillip Thornton. You are kind and patient and good. You make me laugh and you make me feel safe. You are exactly what I want." Philip kissed her then, properly this time, without the hesitation of their first kiss. She melted into him, her arms coming up around his neck, and for a long moment, nothing existed except the two of them and the feelings building between them like a summer storm. When they finally broke apart, Philip rested his forehead against hers, breathing hard. "I want to do this right," he said quietly. "I want to court you properly to give you time to be sure. But Amelia, I need you to know that my intentions are serious. I am not playing at this." "I know," she whispered. "I have never doubted that." "You are not the kind of man who does anything without meaning it." "I found something," Philip said, the words tumbling out before he could second-guess them. "A piece of land about 5 miles from here. It is not much, just 40 acres with a creek running through it, but the soil is good and there is enough graze for a small herd. The man who owns it is moving back east and he is willing to sell for a fair price." Amelia pulled back slightly to look at him, her eyes wide. "You want to buy land here, in Tucumcari, if you will have me nearby," Philip said. "I know you have your teaching position here, your whole life planned out. I do not want to ask you to give that up. But if I buy this land, build a house on it, could you see yourself there someday? Could you see us building a life together?" For a moment, Amelia just stared at him and Philip's heart sank, certain he had overstepped, pushed too hard too fast. But then tears began to slip down her cheeks and she was nodding frantically. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Philip, I can see that so clearly. I have been seeing it for weeks now, but I was afraid to say anything, afraid I was being foolish and rushing into things again after what happened with my former fiancé." "This is not the same," Philip said fiercely, wiping her tears away with his thumbs. "You are not being foolish. I am cautious to a fault. Everyone who knows me would say so, and I am telling you this feels right. You feel right." They held each other as the sun set, making plans and dreaming dreams. Philip would buy the land and start building a house, something simple at first but sturdy. Amelia would continue teaching, the school being so close to the property that she could easily make the journey each day. Eventually, they would marry, once everything was more settled, once they had proven to themselves and everyone else that this was real and lasting. Mischief, apparently bored with the emotional humans, wandered off to hunt grasshoppers, her white-tipped tail waving like a flag through the tall grass. The land purchase went through within a week. The seller, a man named Morris who had given up on making a life in the harsh New Mexico territory, was clearly relieved to have found a buyer and did not haggle much over the price. Phillip paid $300, nearly everything he had saved, and felt no regret as he handed over the money. The property was everything he had described to Amelia and more. The creek was spring-fed and ran year-round according to Morris, crucial in this dry country. There was a natural meadow where cattle could graze, and a spot on a low rise that would be perfect for a house, high enough to catch the breeze in summer but sheltered from the worst of the winter winds. Phillip threw himself into building with the same focused determination he had brought to everything in his life. He worked from dawn to dusk, hauling logs and digging foundations, his hands blistering and then hardening into calluses. Other men from town came to help when they could spare the time. James Henderson and several others who had come to respect the quiet cowboy who had won Miss Dorsett's heart. Amelia came every day after her teaching duties, bringing food and water, sometimes just sitting and watching him work while Mischief explored her new territory. The cat had taken to the property immediately, as if she had been born to the wild rather than found as a tiny stray. She hunted with fierce concentration, keeping the area around the building site clear of mice and snakes. "She is earning her keep," Phillip observed one evening, watching Mischief stalk through the grass. "She has always been a good hunter," Amelia said. "Even when she was tiny, she was catching grasshoppers and moths. I suppose all cats have that instinct, but she seems particularly talented at it." "We will need a good mouser when we have a barn," Phillip said, then caught himself at the casual way he had said we. But Amelia just smiled, apparently not bothered by the presumption. "We will need a lot of things," she agreed. "Chickens for eggs, perhaps a milk cow, maybe a dog or two to help with any cattle you acquire." They talked like this often now, planning a future together as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Phillip still marveled at how easily Amelia had woven herself into his life, how what had started as caution and distance had transformed into this comfortable intimacy. The schoolhouse was completed in early September, a solid building that the whole town took pride in. Amelia moved into the small living quarters attached to the school, though Phillip noticed she spent more time at the building site of their future home than in her new rooms. She was a natural teacher, patient but firm, and the children adored her. Phillip sometimes stopped by to watch through the window, seeing her with students of all ages clustered around, their faces intent as she explained arithmetic or read from a book. She made learning seem like an adventure rather than a chore, and even the most reluctant students found themselves engaged on a cool October morning. With Phillip's house nearly complete, he rode into town to pick up supplies and found Amelia sitting on the schoolhouse steps looking troubled. School had clearly let out for the day, the children scattered to their various homes, but she had not moved from her spot. "What is wrong?" Phillip asked, dismounting and sitting beside her. Amelia was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "One of my students, little Thomas Harris, came to school with bruises today. He said he fell, but I do not believe him. I think his father has been hitting him." Phillip felt anger rise in his chest. He had no tolerance for men who hurt children. "Did you ask him about it?" "I tried gently, but he would not talk to me, just insisted he had fallen. But Phillip, I have seen enough to know the difference between an accident and deliberate harm." She turned to look at him, her eyes pleading. "What do I do?" "If I accuse Mr. Harris without proof, he could make trouble for the school for me. But if I do nothing and something worse happens to Thomas—" Phillip took her hand, squeezing gently. "Let me talk to Harris, man to man without accusations, just expressing concern. Sometimes that is enough, just knowing that people are watching, that the child is not invisible. You would do that? Amelia asked, relief clear in her voice. Of course, Phillip said. Thomas is your student, which makes him our concern. I will handle it carefully. He did exactly that, finding Joshua Harris at the saloon that evening and buying him a drink. Phillip was careful to keep the conversation casual, but he made sure Harris understood that Miss Dorsett had noticed Thomas's bruises, that the whole town cared about the children's welfare, that any man who could not control his temper around his own son was no man at all. Harris had blustered and made excuses, but Phillip saw the fear in his eyes, the understanding that he was being watched now. It was not a perfect solution, but it was something. And when Thomas came to school the next week without any new marks, Amelia's grateful smile made everything worthwhile. The first frost came in November, painting the windows white and turning the world crystalline and beautiful. Phillip's house was finished, a simple 4-room structure with solid walls and a good roof. It was not fancy, but it was well built and it was his. Theirs really, though Amelia had not moved in yet, propriety requiring they wait until they were married. It is perfect, Amelia said, walking through the empty rooms, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floors. Mischief darted past, exploring every corner with feline enthusiasm. It needs furniture and curtains and 100 other things, but it is perfect. I was thinking we could marry in the spring, Phillip said, watching her face carefully. Give us time to prepare properly, let you finish the school year, unless you want to wait longer. Spring is perfect, Amelia said, turning to him with shining eyes. I do not want to wait longer than that. I have already waited long enough for you to come into my life. They kissed in the empty parlor of their new home, and Phillip felt a peace settle over him that he had never experienced before. This was what he had been searching for all those years on the trail, this sense of belonging, of being exactly where he was meant to be. The next months were a flurry of preparation. Amelia continued teaching while also planning their wedding and making their house into a home. She sewed curtains and acquired furniture, some bought from families leaving the territory, some gifted by generous townspeople who had come to love their schoolteacher. Phillip bought 6 head of cattle, a small start but enough to begin building a herd. He hired a local boy to help with the work, teaching him the basics of ranching while learning himself what it meant to stay in one place and build something lasting. Mischief appointed herself supervisor of all activities, alternating between the house and the schoolhouse depending on where Amelia happened to be. She had grown into a large, beautiful cat, her orange fur thick and glossy, her hunting skills keeping the property clear of vermin. Children from the school often begged to pet her, and she tolerated their attention with feline grace, though she always returned to Phillip when given the choice. She is your familiar, Amelia joked one evening, watching the cat curl up in Phillip's lap as they sat by the fire in their new home. Like a witch's cat, except you are not a witch. Just a cautious cowboy who somehow found happiness, Phillip said, stroking Mischief's soft ears. The cat purred, a deep rumbling sound that filled the quiet room. Not so cautious anymore, Amelia observed. You took the biggest risk of all, letting someone into your heart. Best decision I ever made, Phillip said seriously. Even when you drove me crazy with impatience waiting for the right time to say something. I never drove you crazy, Amelia protested, laughing. You did, Phillip insisted. Every moment I was near you and could not touch you, could not tell you what I was feeling, was torture. Do you know how many times I almost kissed you before I finally did? Tell me, Amelia said, moving closer to him on the settee they had purchased together. Dozens, Phillip admitted. That first day, when you looked up at me from the dust with those green eyes. The day you showed me your schoolhouse plans and your whole face lit up with excitement. The evening we watched the sunset and you talked about your hopes for the future. Every single time you laughed at something I said or touched my hand or smiled at me like I mattered. Amelia was silent for a moment, her eyes suspiciously bright. You did matter. You do matter, more than I can put into words. They married on a warm day in early April, with wildflowers blooming across the prairie and the sky a perfect blue overhead. The ceremony was held outside the schoolhouse, with what seemed like the entire population of Tucumcari in attendance. Amelia wore a dress of pale green that matched her eyes, simple but beautiful, with wildflowers woven into her hair. Philip wore his best clothes, carefully cleaned and pressed, and tried not to shake as he waited for her to walk toward him. When she did, her hand in James Henderson's arm since she had no father to give her away, Philip felt his throat tighten with emotion. She was beautiful and she was choosing him, and he could barely believe his good fortune. The vows were traditional but heartfelt. Philip promised to love and cherish her, to provide for her and protect her, and meant every word. Amelia promised the same, her voice steady and sure, no doubt in her eyes. When the circuit preacher pronounced them married, Philip kissed his wife for the first time in front of God and witnesses, and the assembled crowd cheered. Mischief, who had been sitting patiently at Amelia's feet throughout the ceremony, let out a loud meow of apparent approval, making everyone laugh. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. Mrs. Chen had prepared food, amazing dishes that blended her Chinese heritage with frontier practicality. There was music and dancing, children running wild while their parents relaxed and enjoyed the rare social occasion. Philip danced with his wife under the open sky, holding her close and marveling at how much his life had changed in the past 8 months. From a cautious man planning to pass through Tucumcari without stopping, he had become someone's husband, a property owner, a man with roots and responsibilities and reasons to stay. Happy? Amelia asked, her head resting against his chest as they swayed to the music. Happier than I knew I could be, Philip answered honestly. You changed everything for me, you and that troublemaking kitten of yours. Our kitten, Amelia corrected. She made her choice months ago. You are her person. As if summoned, Mischief appeared, weaving between their feet and nearly tripping them both. Philip laughed and scooped the cat up with one arm, continuing to dance with his wife while holding their cat, not caring how ridiculous it looked. This was his life now, full of love and laughter and small moments of joy. It was nothing like he had imagined when he rode into town that hot August day, but it was everything he had needed without knowing it. They spent their wedding night in their own home, finally together without the restrictions of propriety. Philip had worried he might be awkward or unsure, but with Amelia everything felt natural and right. They loved each other with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies and hearts in equal measure. Afterward, lying tangled together in their bed with Mischief curled at their feet, Philip felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. I love you, he said into the darkness. I do not think I have said that enough. I love you, Amelia Thornton. He felt her smile against his shoulder. I love you too, Philip. I think I started falling for you the moment you caught Mischief in the saloon, so gentle and patient with a tiny animal you had no reason to care about. That is when I knew you were someone special. I thought you were beautiful and kind and completely overwhelming, Philip admitted. I wanted to run as far away as I could because I knew you were dangerous to my carefully ordered life. Dangerous? Amelia asked, amusement in her voice. Terrifying, Philip confirmed. You made me want things I had convinced myself I did not need. A home, a family, someone to share my life with. I had been alone for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to want more. And now I cannot imagine going back to that loneliness, Phillip said. You made life fun again, made me remember what it is like to look forward to tomorrow. You and mischief, disrupting my carefully cautious existence. Amelia laughed softly. Poor cautious cowboy, ambushed by a schoolteacher and her cat. Best ambush of my life, Phillip said, and kissed her again, deep and slow and full of promise for the future they were building together. The seasons turned and their life together found its rhythm. Phillip worked the land, gradually expanding their small herd of cattle and learning the particular challenges of ranching in the New Mexico territory. It was hard work, but satisfying in a way the cattle drives had never been. This was his land, his stock, his future growing before his eyes. Amelia continued teaching, her schoolhouse becoming the heart of the small community. She taught reading and writing and arithmetic, but also kindness and integrity and the value of education. Her students flourished under her care, and parents praised the difference she was making in their children's lives. Mischief ruled their small ranch with feline authority, keeping the barn free of mice and supervising all activities with typical cat superiority. She had become something of a local legend, known for her unusual size and her devoted attachment to Phillip. Children from school often begged to visit just to see the famous cat who had brought their teacher and the quiet cowboy together. When Amelia discovered she was expecting their first child the following spring, Phillip felt joy so intense it was almost frightening. They had talked about children, dreamed about them, but the reality of a baby on the way made everything suddenly very real and permanent. "Are you scared?" Amelia asked him one night, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Terrified," Phillip admitted. "What do I know about being a father? I lost my own parents so young. What if I am no good at it? You will be wonderful," Amelia said with complete confidence. "Look at how gentle you are with mischief, how patient with the young boy who helps you with the cattle. You have so much love in you, Phillip. Our child will be lucky to have you as a father." Her faith in him was humbling and strengthening at once. Phillip vowed that he would be the best father he could be, that his child would never know the kind of loss and loneliness that had defined his own youth. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, Amelia continuing to teach almost until the very end despite Phillip's worried protests. "Women have been having babies while working for thousands of years," she told him with amused exasperation. "I am not an invalid, just pregnant." Their son was born on a cold December night, arriving with a loud cry that announced his displeasure with the world. Phillip held him for the first time with shaking hands, awed by the tiny, perfect person they had created. The baby had Amelia's green eyes and what looked like it would be Phillip's dark hair, a perfect blend of both parents. They named him Paul, and he became the center of their universe. Mischief, who Phillip had worried might be jealous of the baby, instead appointed herself the child's guardian. She slept under his cradle and purred whenever he cried, her soothing rumble often calming him when nothing else would. "She knows he is part of our family," Amelia said, watching the cat gently sniff the baby's tiny fingers. "Animals understand these things better than we give them credit for," Phillip had to agree. Mischief had been the catalyst for everything good in his life, the troublemaking kitten who had led him to Amelia, and everything that followed. He could never regret that hot August day when he had helped catch a runaway kitten and met a woman who changed his entire world. 2 years later, Amelia gave birth to their daughter, Emma, who had her father's serious expression and her mother's warm heart. The house that had seemed so spacious when it was just the two of them now rang with the sounds of children playing and laughing, with all the chaos and joy that came with a growing family. Philip's cattle operation had grown successful enough that he was able to hire permanent help, men he trusted to help work the land while he spent more time with his family. He had learned that there were things more important than work, that the time with his children while they were young was precious and fleeting. He taught Paul to ride almost before the boy could walk, settling him in the saddle in front of him and walking Ranger in gentle circles around the yard. He showed Emma how to feed the chickens they had acquired, laughing at her delight when the birds pecked grain from her tiny hands. Amelia had eventually stopped teaching full-time, though she still tutored children who needed extra help and held reading circles at their home. She poured her considerable energy into their family and community, becoming someone everyone turned to for advice or help or simply a sympathetic ear. On quiet evenings, when the children were finally asleep and the house was peaceful, Philip and Amelia would sit on their front porch just as they had done during their courtship. Mischief, now an elderly cat moving slower but still devoted, would settle across Philip's lap, purring contentedly. "Did you ever imagine this?" Amelia asked one such evening, her head on his shoulder, "when you rode into Tucumcari that day?" "Never," Philip said honestly. "I was so focused on being alone, on not needing anyone. I thought caution meant keeping myself separate from others." "What changed your mind?" Philip thought about it, really considered the question. "You changed it. You and Mischief, showing me that life could be more than just surviving. You made everything fun and bright and worth the risk. I learned that real caution is not about avoiding connection. It is about being careful with the connections you have, treasuring them and protecting them." "That is very wise," Amelia said softly. "I learned from a wise woman," Philip replied. "One who saw something worth saving in a lonely cowboy and decided to chase after him as determinedly as she chased that kitten through the streets." Amelia laughed, the sound still as bright and joyful as it had been the first day he met her. "I did not chase you. I simply made myself available and let you figure out what you wanted." "You chased me," Philip insisted, grinning, "and I am forever grateful that you did." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. In the distance, Philip could hear the cattle settling for the night, the soft sounds of his horses in their corral. Inside the house, his children slept safely, dreaming whatever dreams children had. His wife sat beside him, warm and real and permanently his. It was not the life he had planned, but it was the life he had needed. Tucumcari had become home, this land and these people and this family he had built. The cautious cowboy had found happiness after all, led to it by a woman and her delightful kitten who had made life worth living. As the years continued to pass, Philip watched his children grow into remarkable people. Paul developed his father's careful nature, but combined it with his mother's warmth, becoming a steady, reliable young man who wanted nothing more than to work the ranch alongside his father. Emma inherited her mother's love of learning and her father's quiet strength, declaring her intention to become a teacher like her mother. They added to the house as needed, building extra rooms to accommodate their growing family and the occasional guest. The ranch expanded as well, Philip buying adjacent properties as they became available, until they had over 200 acres of good grazing land. Mischief lived to the impressive age of 16, finally passing away peacefully in her sleep one spring morning. They buried her on the hill overlooking the house, and Philip carved a small marker that read, "Mischief, beloved friend who brought us together." Amelia cried as they said goodbye to the cat who had been there from the very beginning, who had in her own small way been responsible for everything good in their lives. "She had a good life," Philip said, holding his grieving wife. "She was loved and safe, and she knew it." "Not many animals can say that. She brought us luck," Amelia said through her tears. "From the moment I found her, everything changed for the better. I will miss her so much." They all missed the cat, her absence a hole in their daily routine. But life on a ranch did not stop for grief, and eventually, the sharp pain of loss softened into warm memories. Paul married at 22, bringing home a sweet girl named Sarah who fit into their family as if she had always been there. They built a house on the far side of the property, close enough for family dinners but far enough for independence. When they had their first child, a boy they named Philip after his grandfather, Philip Sr. felt his heart nearly burst with joy at holding his grandson. Emma pursued her education with fierce determination, eventually studying at a teaching college in Santa Fe before returning to Tucumcari to take over the school from her mother. Watching his daughter teach, seeing her carry on Amelia's legacy of compassion and excellence, filled Philip with immense pride. Amelia and Philip grew old together, their love deepening and maturing like good whiskey. They had their disagreements and frustrations, as all couples did, but beneath everything was a foundation of respect and genuine affection that made working through problems possible. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole town threw them a celebration. It was held at the schoolhouse, just like their wedding, with 3 generations of students whom Amelia had taught standing to praise the woman who had changed their lives. Philip listened with tears in his eyes as person after person talked about how Mrs. Thornton had taught them to read, had encouraged them when they doubted themselves, had believed in them when no one else did. "You have done so much good," Philip whispered to her as they danced together, both of them moving slower than they had as young newlyweds but no less committed to each other. "So many lives changed because you came to Tucumcari." "We did it together," Amelia corrected. "You supported me every step of the way, made it possible for me to teach by building this life for us. None of it would have been possible without you." "I would say we make a good team," Philip said, pulling her closer. "The best team," Amelia agreed, reaching up to kiss him sweetly. They retired from active work in their 60s, Paul taking over full operation of the ranch while they enjoyed a slower pace of life. They traveled some, taking the train to visit cities they had only read about, but they always returned to Tucumcari, to the home they had built and the life they loved. Philip taught his grandchildren to ride, just as he had taught their fathers before them. He told them stories about the old days, about cattle drives and wild country, about the time he had ridden into Tucumcari planning to stay just one night and instead found his entire future. "Tell us again about grandmother and the kitten," the grandchildren would beg, and Philip would smile and launch into the familiar story. How a beautiful woman had been chasing a troublesome orange kitten through the streets, how he had helped catch the little escape artist, how that one moment of kindness had led to everything else. "The moral of the story," he would always conclude, "is that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments you do not plan, from the times you let yourself be open to possibility instead of being too cautious." "But grandfather," one of the older grandchildren once said, "everyone says you are the most cautious person they know." "I am cautious about the things that matter," Philip corrected gently. "I am careful with my family's safety, with my responsibilities, with the trust people place in me. But I learned not to be cautious about love, not to hold back from joy because I am afraid of being hurt. Your grandmother taught me that lesson, and it is the most important one I ever learned." As Philip approached his 70th year, he began to slow down considerably. His joints ached on cold mornings, and he did not have the stamina he had once possessed. But his mind remained sharp, and his heart remained full, surrounded by children and grandchildren and a wife who still made him smile every single day. They acquired a new cat, a tiny orange kitten that one of Emma's students brought to school. The moment Philip saw her, he felt his throat tighten with emotion. She looked exactly like Mischief had all those years ago, the same bright orange fur and white paws, the same intelligent golden eyes. "We have to take her," Amelia said softly, reading his mind as she so often did. "It is like she was sent to us. They named her Hope, and she brought new life into their home." She was not quite as mischievous as her predecessor had been, but she had the same affectionate nature, the same way of curling up on Philip's lap and purring until the world seemed right again. On a warm evening in late summer, exactly 40 years after he had first ridden into Tucumcari, Philip sat on his porch with Amelia beside him and Hope purring on his lap. Their children and grandchildren had just left after a big family dinner, the house still echoing with their laughter and love. "We built something good," Philip said, taking Amelia's hand in his. Her fingers were twisted now with age, marked with liver spots and the wear of decades, but they were still the most beautiful hands he had ever held. "We built something wonderful," Amelia corrected. "A family, a home, a legacy." "All because I could not hold onto a kitten," Philip laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. "All because I decided to stay one extra day, then another, then forever. Best decision I ever made, taking that risk on you." "I was not a risk," Amelia protested, but she was smiling. "I was a sure thing." "You were terrifying," Philip countered, "but in the best possible way." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange and deep purple. Hope purred steadily, a small, warm weight of contentment. The cattle were settled in the pasture, the horses quiet in their barn. Everything was peaceful and right. "You have any regrets?" Amelia asked softly. "About not traveling more, not seeing more of the world?" "Not a single one," Philip said honestly. "I have everything I ever wanted right here. A home, a family, a purpose. And you, always you. How could I regret anything that led me to this?" "I love you," Amelia said, leaning her head on his shoulder exactly as she had done 40 years before. "I loved you from almost the first moment, and I have never stopped." "I love you too," Philip replied. "You made life worth living. You and your delightful kitten showed a cautious cowboy that happiness was possible if he was brave enough to reach for it." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Philip felt a contentment so deep and complete that words could not express it. He had lived a good life, full of love and purpose and meaning. He had been husband and father and grandfather, rancher and friend and neighbor. He had known sorrow and loss, but mostly he had known joy. The cautious cowboy had found his happiness after all, and it had been better than anything he could have imagined that hot August day in 1878. All because a woman and her delightful kitten had made life fun, had shown him what truly mattered, had loved him enough to make him brave. They sat together on their porch as darkness fell, husband and wife, partners and best friends, still as devoted to each other as they had been the day they married. Their life together was proof that sometimes the best things come from the moments we do not plan, from opening our hearts when it would be easier to keep them closed, from taking a chance on love even when caution suggests otherwise. And in the end, that was the greatest lesson of all, that love was always worth the risk. That connection was more valuable than solitude, that a life built with someone you loved was the greatest adventure of all. The cautious cowboy and his beloved wife lived out their days surrounded by family and love, their story becoming legend in Tucumcari. They were buried side by side on the hill where Mischief rested, their legacy continuing in the children and grandchildren who carried their values forward. And sometimes, on quiet summer evenings, people claimed they could see an old orange cat prowling that hillside, watching over the family she had brought together so many years before, still causing mischief from beyond the grave. But those were just stories, the kind frontier towns loved to tell. The real truth was simpler and more profound. Two people had found each other when they both needed it most, had built a life together full of meaning and purpose, and had loved each other with a devotion that lasted all their days. That was the true magic, the real miracle, and it was more than enough.